Are you ready for spooky season? Today, I'm going to show you how to make a trick-or-treat bag. Hi, welcome to Sewing with Stacy. I'm Stacy, and today I'm going to show you how to make this trick-or-treat bag in 30 minutes or less. It's a super simple project. Here's what you need. You're going to need your lining fabric and also your main bag fabric. You're going to cut 2 rectangles of each, 14 by 16 inches long. Next, you're going to need some webbing. You need 2 pieces that are 21 inches long. You will also need a lighter to finish the edges as long as you are using a plastic polyurethane webbing. Cotton will not require that. You of course will also need a good pair of shears and your trusty sewing machine. Let's get into it. So when you cut your pieces 14 by 16 inches, make sure that the right sides of the fabric or the colored sides are together. So when you go to stitch them, that's the inside of the bag. Start by sewing down the long edge of your bag. Using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, which is the edge of your presser foot, go all the way down to the end. You can either sew off the edge, or you can just pivot by putting your needle down, presser foot up, and turning the fabric. Again, using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, the width of your presser foot, sew all the way down the short edge of the bag. You will either sew off the end or pivot up to the other long side. Continue straight stitching up the last long edge of the bag, using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Keep the tension on top and bottom, and use as many pins or clips as needed to hold your bag together. When you get to the end, don't forget to backstitch. Clip your threads and put that off to the side. Now we're going to sew the lining. Sew all the way down the side, pivot, stitch a few inches on the bottom, leave a gap, and start stitching across the rest of the bottom. Pivot and finish the long side. Let me explain that with more detail. Stitch down your long side using your 1/4 inch seam allowance and pivot at the corner. Once you pivot, you're going to sew a few inches and stop. Make sure you backstitch. Now make sure your needle is in the upright position using the flywheel on the side of the machine. Raise your presser foot and pull the fabric. Put the presser foot down and start stitching again using a backstitch like you normally would. Stitch to the corner and pivot. Continue your 1/4 inch seam allowance down the last long edge of the bag. Once you reach the end, you will need to backstitch to secure the stitching. Now clip your threads, including the ones from the gap. That gap in the stitches will allow us to have a small hole where we will be able to turn the bag right side out once we put our 2 halves together at the top. Now let's stitch our bag together. Turn your liner right side out and inset it into your bag so that the right sides of the fabric are touching. The right sides of the fabric are the colorful sides, or the sides that you want to see when the bag is finished. Don't worry about pulling the corners, we'll fix that later. Next, you want to line up your side seams. Press them open to reduce the bulk in your seams. You can press them open with an iron or just use your fingers. Do this on both sides so that your seams line up from inside to outside. Use as many or as few pins or clips as needed to hold this together. Once you are pinned and ready to go, pull your bag flat so that the fabric is all nice and even. If you have a Singer sewing machine like I do, this little part on the side actually pulls some of the faceplate tray out. I recommend doing this when you sew things in the round. It's especially helpful when you sew sleeves. For our purposes right now, you're going to want to thread your bag so that the opening goes around that stitch plate arm. Makes a nice little looping area, and you can keep your bag nice and flat. I like to start stitching at a side seam because it helps disguise some of your back stitching. Make sure none of your pins get in the way, put your presser foot down, and I use a 1/4 inch seam allowance here. But feel free to use up to a 1/2 inch if that's more comfortable. Sew all the way around, making sure that your fabric stays lined up together. If you're less experienced, you might want to use pins or clips to hold it together and take them out as you go. Make sure you continue to hold good tension on your fabric, as the feed dogs may have a differential feed, making your lining go under faster or slower than your top. Holding tension top and bottom, front and back reduces the amount of shifting. If you do want to leave your pins in as you go, you can pin them in horizontally and very carefully stitch over them. If you put them in vertically, you definitely have to take them out, otherwise you risk a chance of breaking a needle. Now that you've made it all the way around, line up your stitching and backstitch to finish off your top. Now we're going to turn the bag right side out. Reach your hand into the bag and find that gap in the stitching in your lining. Reach in and pull your main fabric through that hole. Be gentle with it. This might take a few minutes. You're going to work that fabric through until you get the entire bag right side out. Now that you've taken your time to get it all right side out, you're going to have what looks kind of like a giant fabric tube, and we're going to start setting the bag. Put a little bit of it to the inside, but not all the way. We're going to close that gap that we left open. Turn in your seam allowance. I then like to finger press it and pin the start and the end of the gap so that I know where to start and stop. We're going to put in a very teeny tiny top stitch. If you wish, you can press this with your iron or use more pins. On the machine, I set the fabric all the way over to the edge, and it looks like I'm going to put in another 1/4 inch seam allowance, but we can't do that. I'm going to actually use my needle position dial, which is on the top of the machine, and move my needle all the way over to the right. By doing this, it gives me more fabric under the presser foot and more control as to where the stitches go. This is a little trick that I like to use so that, again, you can have more control of the fabric and you can be really, really close to the edge. Using those start and stop pins helps me gauge how far I need to go so that I don't do an excessive stitching. See how close that is to the edge of the bag? Now when it's on the inside, that gap won't matter. There won't be any holes on the inside of the bag between the liner and the exterior. Clip your threads, and now we're going to put the liner all the way into the bag. This is where you want to work your corners. Make sure that they're fully pointed and all the way out. You can use something like a chopstick or a pin to pull those corners all the way out if needed. Once the corners are pulled, you're going to start lining up your top edge. You can either finger press like I am if you have a really nice cotton fabric, or you can take it over to your iron and press the edges flat. If you want some of this cool pumpkin fabric, check out the links in the description below. Now we're going to top stitch the top edge of the bag. Make sure you check that needle position and move it back to the middle. You'll see the needle lined up in the middle of the presser foot. Again, I like to use a side seam as my starting point to hide the back stitch. Here, you can either use a 1/4 inch or up to 1 inch as a decorative top stitch. Because this is mostly a decorative top stitch, this is where you can play around with a fun decorative thread or maybe a special stitch that you haven't used on your machine more than just a straight stitch. Although this is mostly a decorative top stitch, it does help hold the lining and the outer together so that your edges won't roll. If you think this video has been helpful, drop me a comment below. I'd love to know your thoughts. At this point, you have a pillowcase style bag, and that's fine if that's all you want. But continue on with me to add the handles. Grab your 2 pieces of 21-inch long webbing. Find your side seam and measure 3 inches from the side seam. Set the webbing in 1 inch down from the top. Pin it in place and do this for all 4 connection points, making sure that your webbing doesn't twist as you pin it in. I would suggest that you do one side at a time. So find one side seam and do one end of each strap at a time. This way you don't have to move the bag around as much. Continue pinning your straps, 3 inches in from the side seam and 1 inch down. While you're doing this, make sure that the strap stays flat. Make a nice loop, make sure it doesn't twist, and then pin it in the appropriate place. If you've done it correctly, you should be able to pull at the side seams and the straps line up. Now we're going to stitch them in using a box stitch. The top of the box stitch will be in line with the top stitch of your bag. Stitch all the way across the webbing, back stitch all the way back, and stitch forward all the way again. This gives you a triple stitch all the way across. Needle down, turn your bag, and do a diagonal stitch to the opposite corner. Again, you're going to stitch forward, back stitch all the way, and forward again. All of these stitches in this box will be triple stitches. Don't be afraid to use your hand wheel to get all the way to the corner. Once you do get to the corner, needle down, turn your bag, and you're going to do the bottom straight stitch of the box. So you are going straight across again. This should be parallel to your top stitch. Once you triple stitch the bottom, needle down, turn the bag one last time, and do the opposite diagonal stitch, ending where you started. Make sure that it is a triple stitch. This box stitch with triple stitching reinforces the bag handles and makes it extra strong. When you're finished, it should look like an X with a line on the top and bottom. You're going to repeat the box stitch for the other 3 connection points of your handles. This is a really great project for beginners because it uses several different techniques, but all within the realm of a straight stitch, so you can practice many different techniques of straight stitching. As an experienced sewer, this might only take someone about 30 minutes from cut to finish. If you're a beginner, it may take you a little longer, but don't let that discourage you. Either way, at the end, you're going to end up with a really great bag. Once you put all 4 box stitches in, you're done. Your bag is ready for trick-or-treating or grocery shopping, whatever you want to use it for. You have a durable, washable bag that you can use year after year. If you want any of the tools or materials that I use in the video, check out the links in the description below. And there you have it, the perfect trick-or-treat bag. It's not too big, but it's big enough that if you have a smaller candy bucket and want to use it to dump your candy into, or if you're going to one of those theme park Halloween parties, it's the perfect size for collecting all of the candy throughout the evening. So you can use it for trick-or-treat, or even just use it as like a book bag or a shopping bag at the grocery store. Whatever you want. It's the perfect size tote, especially for Halloween. I hope you enjoyed this project. It was a quick one, but a good one. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I'm happy to answer anything that you might have to ask. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for notifications. I'm Stacy, and I'll see you between the seams.